The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Windsor Castle, as Sergeant Major William Thompson adjusted his red tunic for what he believed would be another routine day of service. After 23 years protecting the royal family, Thompson had seen countless changes within the palace walls, but nothing could have prepared him for the events that would unfold on this particular Tuesday in October. Thompson had been assigned to the Queen's personal security detail for the past 8 years, a position he considered the highest honor of his military career. He knew every corner of the castle, every routine, and most importantly, every member of the royal household, including the beloved Corgis, that had been the Queen's constant companions for decades. That morning, as he made his rounds through the East Wing, Thompson noticed an unusual commotion near the Queen's private quarters. Queen Camilla emerged from the ornate doorway, her face set in a determined expression that Thompson had come to recognize during her time as Queen Consort. Behind her walked Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, carrying what appeared to be a small travel carrier. Thompson's trained eye immediately identified the occupant of the carrier as Whisper, one of the late Queen Elizabeth's most cherished corgis. The small dog had been particularly close to the former monarch, often seen sitting faithfully by her side during private moments in the castle's gardens. Since Queen Elizabeth's passing, the care of her beloved pets had become a sensitive matter within the royal household. "Your Majesty," Thompson greeted with a respectful bow as Queen Camilla approached. "Good morning." Camilla barely acknowledged his greeting, her attention focused on the phone conversation she was having with someone on the other end. Thompson caught fragments of her words as she passed by. Something about arrangements being finalized and the new family will collect her this afternoon. A cold feeling settled in Thompson's stomach as he realized what was happening. He had overheard conversations among the staff about discussions regarding the future of the Queen's pets, but he had assumed they would remain within the royal family or be cared for by trusted members of the household staff who had known them for years. Mrs. Patterson, noticing Thompson's concerned expression, slowed her pace and whispered quietly, "Her Majesty has decided that Whisper would be better suited with a family outside the palace. She believes the Corgi needs a more normal home environment." Thompson felt his jaw tighten. He had witnessed firsthand the deep bond between Queen Elizabeth and her Corgis. These weren't just pets. They were living connections to the late monarch's memory, creatures that had provided her comfort and companionship during her final years. The thought of Whisper being sent away to strangers felt like a betrayal of everything he had sworn to protect. As the morning progressed, Thompson found it increasingly difficult to focus on his duties. He kept thinking about Whisper, remembering how the little corgi would wait by the window in the Queen's sitting room, as if still expecting her beloved owner to return. The dog had been grieving too, and now she was being uprooted from the only home she had ever known. During his lunch break, Thompson approached his colleague, Corporal James Mitchell, who had also served on the Queen's detail. "Did you hear about Whisper?" Thompson asked, keeping his voice low as they sat in the staff dining area. Mitchell nodded grimly. "Word travels fast around here. Half the staff is upset about it. That little dog was the Queen's shadow for nearly a decade. It doesn't seem right. Sending her away like she's just another piece of furniture to be disposed of." Thompson stared out the window at the gardens where Queen Elizabeth used to walk with her corgis every evening. "Someone needs to say something," he said quietly. "This isn't just about a pet. It's about honoring the Queen's memory and the things that mattered most to her." The afternoon brought news that the new family would be arriving within the hour to collect Whisper. Thompson watched from his post as a car pulled up to the castle's side entrance, a couple with 2 young children stepping out with barely contained excitement. They seemed pleasant enough, but they were strangers to Whisper, strangers to the royal household, and strangers to the deep significance of what they were about to take away. Thompson stood at attention near the main corridor, his mind racing as he watched the family being escorted through the castle by Mrs. Patterson. The children's excited whispers echoed off the ancient stone walls, their innocent enthusiasm a stark contrast to the gravity of what was taking place. They had no understanding of the history they were about to inherit, no knowledge of the countless hours Whisper had spent as the Queen's faithful companion. As they approached the room where Whisper was being kept, Thompson made a decision that would change the course of his career forever. He stepped forward, intercepting the group with military precision. "Excuse me, Mrs. Patterson. Thompson said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with you privately before this transfer takes place." Mrs. Patterson looked surprised, glancing nervously toward the family who had stopped to examine a portrait hanging in the hallway. "Sergeant Major Thompson, is there a security concern? The arrangements have all been approved by Her Majesty." "That's exactly what I need to discuss," Thompson replied, maintaining his professional composure despite the turmoil in his chest. "If you would give me just a moment." Mrs. Patterson excused herself from the family, explaining they would continue shortly, and followed Thompson to a quiet alcove near one of the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. The afternoon light filtered through the glass, casting intricate patterns on the floor between them. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something," Thompson began, choosing his words carefully. "I've been in service to this family for over 2 decades. I've seen the Queen through some of her most difficult moments, including her final months. Those corgis weren't just pets to her, they were family." Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between her loyalty to the current Queen and her understanding of Thompson's concerns. "Sergeant Major, I share your feelings about this situation, truly I do. But Queen Camilla feels that the dogs would be happier in a traditional family setting, away from the formality and restrictions of palace life." Thompson's training had taught him to respect the chain of command, but it had also taught him to recognize when something fundamentally wrong was happening under his watch. "With all due respect, ma'am, Whisper is 14 years old. She spent her entire life in this castle. Moving her now, after she's already lost her owner, could be devastating for an animal her age." The housekeeper's expression softened, revealing the internal conflict she had been hiding. "The Queen's decision is final, Sergeant Major. The family has traveled a considerable distance, and they're expecting to take Whisper home today." Thompson glanced back toward the family, who were now being shown into the sitting room where Whisper waited. He could hear Queen Camilla's voice from down the hallway, apparently having finished her phone conversations and now approaching to oversee the transfer personally. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm asking you to delay this for 24 hours, Thompson said urgently. "Give me that time to present an alternative solution. There are members of the household staff who would gladly care for Whisper, people she knows and trusts." Before Mrs. Patterson could respond, Queen Camilla appeared at the end of the corridor, her expression immediately hardening when she saw Thompson in earnest conversation with the housekeeper. She approached with measured steps, her royal bearing unmistakable even in the relatively informal setting. "Sergeant Major Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the authority of her position. "I trust there isn't a problem with today's arrangements." Thompson felt the weight of the moment settle around him like armor. Every instinct told him to step back, to offer a respectful apology and return to his post. But the image of Whisper, waiting unknowingly in the sitting room, strengthened his resolve. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing appropriately before meeting her gaze directly, "I wanted to respectfully request that we reconsider the placement of Whisper. I believe there may be better alternatives that would honor the late Queen's memory while ensuring Whisper's well-being." The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop several degrees. Queen Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly, and Mrs. Patterson visibly paled beside them. In 23 years of service, Thompson had never directly questioned a royal decision, and everyone present understood the significance of this moment. "I see," Queen Camilla said slowly. "And you feel qualified to make decisions about the welfare of the royal pet, Sergeant Major?" Thompson maintained his military posture, even as he felt his career hanging in the balance. "I feel qualified to advocate for what I believe the late Queen would have wanted, Your Majesty." The silence that followed Thompson's words stretched through the corridor like a taut wire. Queen Camilla's expression remained unreadable, but the slight tightening around her eyes suggested his words had struck deeper than intended. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen between them, caught in a situation no amount of household management experience had prepared her for. "The late Queen," Camilla said finally, her voice measured and deliberate, "entrusted the care of this family and all its responsibilities to me. That includes making difficult decisions about the practical realities of royal life." Thompson felt sweat beading beneath his ceremonial uniform, but his resolve didn't waver. "Your Majesty, I've watched Whisper every day since the Queen's passing. She waits by the window in her late Majesty's sitting room every evening at 5 o'clock, the exact time they used to take their walks together. She's still mourning, still hoping." From the sitting room came the sound of children's laughter mixed with a small bark. Whisper had met her potential new family, and the interaction seemed to be going well from their perspective. But Thompson knew that Whisper's friendly nature was simply her breeding and training, showing through her confusion and grief. "Sergeant Major Thompson," Queen Camilla said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a tone that carried both authority and warning. "I understand your emotional attachment to the late Queen's possessions, but sentimentality cannot drive practical decisions. This family has a large garden, children who will adore her, and the time to give Whisper the attention she deserves. But she doesn't know them," Thompson pressed, knowing he was crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. "Your Majesty, in the Queen's final weeks, Whisper barely left her side. Even when her late Majesty was too weak to pet her, Whisper would lie on the floor beside her bed. They had a bond that went beyond ordinary pet ownership." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat softly, glancing nervously between the two. "Perhaps we should move this discussion away from the family?" she suggested quietly. Queen Camilla's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, perhaps we should." She turned to Mrs. Patterson. "Please continue with the transfer. I'll join you shortly." As Mrs. Patterson hurried back toward the sitting room, Queen Camilla faced Thompson fully. The corridor suddenly felt much smaller, the weight of centuries of royal protocol pressing down around them. "Let me be very clear, Sergeant Major," she said, her voice now carrying an edge that made Thompson's military training kick into high alert. "Your job is to protect this family's security, not to question our personal decisions. You seem to have forgotten your place." Thompson stood straighter if that was possible. "Your Majesty, my oath was to serve and protect the crown and all that it represents. The late Queen's Corgis are part of that legacy. They're living connections to her memory, and I believe history will judge how we treat them now." The boldness of his words seemed to surprise even Thompson himself. He had never spoken so directly to any member of the royal family, let alone challenged their decisions with such conviction. But something about the situation had awakened a deeper sense of duty in him, one that went beyond simply following orders. Queen Camilla studied him for a long moment, and Thompson could see her calculating the political and personal implications of his defiance. "You're willing to risk your career over a dog?" she asked finally. "I'm willing to risk my career to honor the memory of a queen I served for 8 years, Thompson replied without hesitation. "Whisper isn't just a dog, Your Majesty. She's one of the last living links to Queen Elizabeth's daily life, to her private moments of joy and comfort." From the sitting room, they could hear Mrs. Patterson explaining to the family about Whisper's favorite toys and feeding schedule. The normalcy of the conversation felt surreal given the confrontation taking place just meters away. "You have 1 minute to explain what alternative you're proposing," Queen Camilla said, crossing her arms, "and it had better be reasonable." Thompson's heart raced, but his mind cleared with the precision of his military training. "There are 3 members of the household staff who worked directly with the Queen and her Corgis for over a decade. Mrs. Sarah Collins in particular helped care for them daily and has a cottage on the estate grounds. Whisper knows her voice, her touch, her routines. And you think a staff member should be responsible for a royal Corgi? I think someone who loved Queen Elizabeth and understands the significance of these animals should be responsible for preserving her memory in this small but meaningful way." Queen Camilla was quiet for several seconds, and Thompson could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Finally, she spoke again, her tone slightly softer but still firm with authority. Queen Camilla turned toward the tall windows, gazing out at the gardens where Queen Elizabeth had spent countless hours with her beloved pets. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the family still getting acquainted with Whisper in the sitting room. "Mrs. Collins," she said finally, still looking outside, "the woman who helped organize the Queen's daily routines with the Corgis." "Yes, Your Majesty," Thompson replied, sensing a slight shift in her tone. "She's been with the household for 15 years and has her own Corgi at home. She understands their needs, their personalities, and most importantly, she understands what they meant to the Queen." Queen Camilla remained silent for another long moment. Thompson could see her reflection in the window glass, her expression thoughtful but troubled. He realized that beneath her royal composure, she too might be struggling with the weight of decisions that affected not just practical matters, but the very legacy of her predecessor. "You realize," she said without turning around, that what you're suggesting would require me to disappoint that family in there. They've driven 3 hours to meet Whisper, and their children are already naming her toys. Thompson felt a pang of guilt about the innocent family, but his conviction remained strong. Your Majesty, with respect, they fell in love with the idea of having a royal corgi. But Mrs. Collins already loves Whisper herself, has cared for her daily, and would be preserving something precious rather than simply acquiring something special. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Mrs. Patterson appeared, looking more flustered than Thompson had ever seen her. Your Majesty, she said breathlessly, I'm afraid we have a situation. Whisper isn't responding well to the children. She's hidden under the sofa and won't come out even for treats. Queen Camilla finally turned from the window, her expression unreadable. What do you mean, not responding well? She seems frightened, Your Majesty. The children are lovely, but they're excited and loud, and Whisper appears to be overwhelmed. The father suggested giving her time to adjust, but she's trembling quite badly. Thompson felt his chest tighten. Your Majesty, Whisper has spent her entire life in controlled, quiet environments. The Queen never raised her voice, never made sudden movements around the dogs. They're not accustomed to the energy of young children. Queen Camilla looked between Thompson and Mrs. Patterson, the weight of the situation clearly affecting her more than she had initially let on. Show me, she said finally. They walked together to the sitting room where they found a scene that broke Thompson's heart. The family was crouched near a large sofa, trying to coax Whisper out from underneath it with gentle words and treats. The children, who had been so excited earlier, were now sitting quietly at their parents' instruction. But their very presence seemed to be causing the little corgi distress. She was fine at first, the mother explained to Queen Camilla. But when our daughter tried to pick her up for a cuddle, Whisper just ran. We've been trying to get her out for 20 minutes. Thompson knelt down and called softly to Whisper in the way he had observed the Queen doing countless times. Come on, girl. It's all right. To his relief, Whisper's brown eyes appeared in the darkness under the sofa, and she let out a small whimper of recognition. She knows you, the father observed, sounding disappointed but understanding. Yes, sir, Thompson replied, still crouched down. I was part of her security detail. She's known me for years. Queen Camilla watched as Thompson continued to speak gently to Whisper, and slowly, the little corgi began to emerge from her hiding place. But instead of approaching the family, she went directly to Thompson, pressing against his leg and looking up at him with eyes that seemed to plead for understanding. Your Majesty, the mother said kindly, perhaps this isn't the right time for Whisper to make such a big change. She's obviously still grieving and not ready for a new family. Thompson looked up at Queen Camilla, hope flickering in his chest as he saw something shift in her expression. She was no longer looking at this as a simple matter of pet placement, but as a complex emotional situation involving a creature who was mourning the loss of the most important person in her world. Mrs. Patterson, Queen Camilla said quietly, please ask Mrs. Collins to join us in my private study in 10 minutes. She turned to the family with genuine apology in her voice. I'm afraid this placement isn't going to work today. Perhaps we should reconsider what's best for Whisper at this difficult time. The family, though disappointed, showed remarkable grace and understanding. They could see that Whisper was distressed, and their primary concern shifted to what would be best for the little corgi, rather than their own desires to take her home. As they prepared to leave, the youngest child, a girl of about 7, approached Thompson where he still sat with Whisper. Will you take good care of her? She asked seriously. She seems really sad. I promise we'll make sure she's looked after properly, Thompson replied, touched by the child's compassion. 30 minutes later, Thompson found himself in an unprecedented situation, standing in Queen Camilla's private study alongside Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Collins. The room was elegantly appointed with personal photographs and mementos, creating an atmosphere that felt more intimate than the formal corridors where his confrontation with the Queen had begun. Mrs. Collins, a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and hands marked by years of caring for both the castle and its 4-legged residents, looked nervous but determined. She had rushed over from her cottage when summoned, still wearing her gardening apron and carrying the scent of the autumn flowers she had been tending. Mrs. Collins, Queen Camilla began, settling into a chair behind her desk while the others remained standing, Sergeant Major Thompson has suggested that you might be willing to take responsibility for Whisper's care. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this arrangement." Mrs. Collins glanced at Thompson with surprise before addressing the Queen directly. "Your Majesty, it would be my honor to care for Whisper. She and I have known each other since she was a puppy. When the Queen was feeling unwell during her final months, I often helped with the daily feeding and grooming routines." "And you understand this would be a permanent arrangement?" Queen Camilla asked. "Not just temporary care until we find another family?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Whisper is 14 years old, which is quite elderly for a Corgi. At her age, she needs stability, familiar faces, and gentle care. I can provide all of that." Mrs. Collins paused, then added softly, "If I may say so, Your Majesty, I believe it would honor Queen Elizabeth's memory to ensure her beloved companion lives out her remaining years, surrounded by love and familiarity." Thompson watched Queen Camilla's face carefully, trying to read her response to Mrs. Collins' heartfelt words. The Queen's expression had softened considerably since their tense exchange in the corridor, but he could still sense her struggle with the decision. "Mrs. Patterson," Queen Camilla said, turning to the housekeeper, "what are your thoughts on this arrangement?" From a practical standpoint, Mrs. Patterson straightened, clearly relieved to be discussing a solution rather than managing a crisis. "Your Majesty, Mrs. Collins has her own cottage on the estate grounds, complete with a secure garden that Whisper already knows from previous visits. She also has experience with senior dogs as her own Corgi lived to be 16. From a practical standpoint, it would be ideal." Queen Camilla leaned back in her chair, her gaze moving between the three people standing before her. Thompson could sense that she was weighing not just the immediate decision, but the broader implications of how the situation had unfolded. "Sergeant Major Thompson," she said finally, her tone more thoughtful than authoritative, "you took quite a risk today, challenging my decision so directly. What made you feel it was worth potentially ending your career?" Thompson had been dreading this question, knowing that his answer could still determine his future with the royal household. "Your Majesty, I've spent my entire adult life in service to the crown. I've learned that true loyalty sometimes means having the courage to speak up when something precious is at stake, even when it's difficult. And you consider one elderly Corgi to be something precious? I consider the memory and values of Queen Elizabeth to be precious, Your Majesty. She taught me through her example that how we treat the most vulnerable creatures in our care reflects who we are as people and as institutions." Mrs. Collins nodded emphatically. "If I may add, Your Majesty, her late Majesty often said that her Corgis brought her more honest affection than most humans ever could. They loved her for who she was, not for her title or position." Queen Camilla was quiet for a long moment, and Thompson could see various emotions playing across her features. Finally, she stood and walked to one of the windows overlooking the estate grounds. "Mrs. Collins," she said without turning around, "I'm approving your request to care for Whisper permanently. Please coordinate with Mrs. Patterson regarding any supplies or veterinary arrangements you might need." Thompson felt a wave of relief wash over him, but Queen Camilla wasn't finished speaking. "However," she continued, now turning back to face them, "I want it clearly understood that this decision is being made because it's genuinely in Whisper's best interest, not because I was pressured into changing my mind." "Of course, Your Majesty," Mrs. Collins said gratefully, "I promise you that Whisper will want for nothing. She'll be loved and cared for as befits one of Queen Elizabeth's cherished companions." Queen Camilla nodded, then fixed her attention on Thompson. "As for you, Sergeant Major, we need to discuss the events of today and what they mean for your future service to this household." Thompson's stomach dropped. Even though the outcome for Whisper had been positive, he had still directly challenged royal authority in a way that was unprecedented in his career. Queen Camilla dismissed Mrs. Collins and Mrs. Patterson, leaving Thompson alone in the study with her. The afternoon light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room and creating an atmosphere that felt both intimate and intimidating. Thompson remained at attention, unsure whether he was about to receive a reprimand, a dismissal, or something else entirely. "Sit down." "Sergeant Major," Queen Camilla said, gesturing to one of the chairs facing her desk, "I think we've had enough formality for one day." Thompson hesitated for a moment before taking the offered seat, his military bearing still evident even in the more relaxed posture. Queen Camilla settled back into her own chair, studying him with an expression that was difficult to read. In 23 years of service, she began, have you ever directly challenged a royal decision before today? No, Your Majesty, Thompson replied honestly. Never. Then what made today different? And I want a complete answer, not just the diplomatic response you gave me earlier. Thompson took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation would likely determine not just his career, but how he would be remembered within the royal household. Your Majesty, during Queen Elizabeth's final weeks, I was often the only other person in the room when she spent time with her corgis. I saw how much comfort they brought her when she was in pain, how her face would light up when Whisper would curl up beside her. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The morning before she passed, Queen Elizabeth was very weak, but she insisted on feeding Whisper herself. Her hands were shaking, and it took her several minutes, but she wouldn't let any of us help. When she finished, she looked at Whisper and said, You've been such a good girl for so many years. I hope someone will take good care of you when I'm gone. Queen Camilla's expression softened noticeably, and Thompson saw something he hadn't expected, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability. She said that? Queen Camilla asked quietly. Yes, Your Majesty. And today when I saw Whisper being prepared to go to strangers, I felt like I was failing in my duty to honor her final wishes. I know I overstepped my authority, and I accept whatever consequences you deem appropriate. Queen Camilla leaned back in her chair, her gaze moving to a framed photograph on her desk of herself and Queen Elizabeth during a more recent royal engagement. Do you know what the most difficult part of this position has been for me, Sergeant Major? Thompson shook his head, surprised by the personal turn the conversation was taking. Living up to her example, Queen Camilla continued. Elizabeth had 70 years to perfect her role, to understand the balance between duty and compassion, between tradition and necessary change. I've had less than 2 years, and every decision I make is measured against her legacy. Thompson remained silent, sensing that Queen Camilla needed to work through her own thoughts. When I decided to place Whisper with that family, I genuinely believed it was the practical solution. A royal household is no place for an elderly, grieving pet, I told myself. But watching her today, seeing how frightened she was, Queen Camilla trailed off, then looked directly at Thompson. You reminded me that sometimes the practical solution isn't the right solution. Your Majesty, Thompson said carefully, I never meant to imply that you don't care about Queen Elizabeth's memory or Whisper's well-being. I simply felt compelled to advocate for what I believed she would have wanted. And you were right to do so, Queen Camilla said, surprising Thompson with the admission. But the way you did it put me in an impossible position. In front of staff, you essentially accused me of dishonoring my predecessor's memory. Thompson felt a flush of shame. I apologize, Your Majesty. My emotions got the better of my judgment. I should have found a more appropriate way to express my concerns. Queen Camilla nodded. Yes, you should have, but... She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. I also recognize that it took considerable courage to risk your career for what you believed was right. That kind of moral conviction isn't something I want to discourage in the people who serve this family. Thompson wasn't sure where the conversation was heading, but he sensed a subtle shift in the Queen's demeanor. Here's what's going to happen, Queen Camilla said, her voice taking on a more decisive tone. You will write a formal letter acknowledging that your approach today was inappropriate and could have been handled through proper channels. That letter will go in your personnel file. Thompson's heart sank slightly, anticipating the rest of his punishment. However, she continued, you will also be taking on additional responsibilities. I want you to liaise with Mrs. Collins regarding Whisper's care, and to coordinate with the other staff members who cared for Queen Elizabeth's remaining pets. If there are concerns about their well-being or placement, I want to know about them before decisions are made, not after. Thompson looked up in surprise. Your Majesty. Consider it a new position, Sergeant Major. Guardian of royal pet welfare, if you will. Clearly, you have insights and concerns that I need to be aware of. Better to formalize that role than to risk another confrontation in a castle corridor. 3 months later, Thompson stood in the gardens of Windsor Castle, watching as Whisper played gently with Mrs. Collins's younger Corgi, Biscuit. The transformation in the elderly dog had been remarkable to witness. While she would never fully recover from the loss of Queen Elizabeth, Whisper had found a new contentment in her life with Mrs. Collins. She's doing well, Queen Camilla observed, approaching Thompson from the path that led back to the castle. It had become a weekly routine for her to check on Whisper's progress, though Thompson suspected it was as much about ensuring her own peace of mind as it was about the Corgi's well-being. "Yes, Your Majesty," Thompson replied, bowing slightly as she joined him. "Mrs. Collins reports that Whisper still has moments where she seems to be looking for the Queen, but they're becoming less frequent. Having Biscuit as a companion has helped tremendously." Queen Camilla watched as Whisper, despite her age, managed a playful bow that invited Biscuit to chase her around Mrs. Collins's garden. "I have to admit," she said quietly, "I'm glad you stood up to me that day, even though your methods were questionable." Thompson had learned to appreciate these moments of candor from the Queen. Their working relationship had evolved considerably since the confrontation 3 months earlier, developing into something that balanced proper respect with honest communication. "Your Majesty, may I ask you something?" Thompson ventured. "Of course. When you made the original decision about Whisper, was it truly about finding her the best home, or were you trying to distance yourself from reminders of Queen Elizabeth?" Queen Camilla was quiet for a long moment, and Thompson worried that he had overstepped again. But when she responded, her voice held no anger. "Both, I suppose," she admitted. "Every day in this role, I'm surrounded by reminders of how beloved Elizabeth was, how perfectly she seemed to embody everything people wanted in a monarch. Sometimes it felt like even her pets were judging me by her standard." "And now?" Thompson asked gently. "Now I understand that honoring her memory doesn't mean erasing all traces of her presence. It means preserving the things that mattered to her and learning from the values she embodied." Queen Camilla gestured toward Whisper, who had settled into a sunny spot in the garden. "That little dog represents Elizabeth's capacity for unconditional love and loyalty. Sending her away would have been like discarding a piece of history." Mrs. Collins emerged from her cottage, carrying a tea service on a tray. She had become accustomed to these visits from Queen Camilla and Thompson, and had taken to preparing refreshments whenever she saw them approaching through her garden gate. "How has she been sleeping, Mrs. Collins?" Queen Camilla asked as they settled into the garden chairs that had been placed near Whisper's favorite resting spot. "Much better, Your Majesty," Mrs. Collins reported, serving the tea with the same attention to detail she had always shown in her royal duties. She stopped waiting by the door every evening, though she still perks up whenever she hears footsteps that sound like the Queen's. Thompson found himself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened that day in October. His new role overseeing the welfare of the royal pets had given him insights into the delicate balance between tradition and change that Queen Camilla faced in every aspect of her position. "Your Majesty," he said, accepting his tea, "I've been thinking about establishing a more formal protocol for the future care of royal pets, something that ensures their needs are considered as thoroughly as any other aspect of royal transition." Queen Camilla raised an eyebrow. "You want to create official policy around pet care?" "I want to create official policy around honoring the emotional connections that make the royal family human," Thompson clarified. Queen Elizabeth's corgis were part of her public image, yes, but they were also a source of private joy and comfort. Future generations should understand that these relationships have value beyond their public relations benefit. Mrs. Collins nodded enthusiastically. "If I may say so, Your Majesty, the Queen often told me that her dogs taught her about loyalty without agenda, love without conditions. She said they grounded her in simple truths when the complexity of royal life became overwhelming." Queen Camilla looked thoughtful as she watched Whisper dozing in the afternoon sunshine. "Draft your proposal, Sergeant Major, but include provisions for situations where keeping royal pets isn't practical or safe. We need to be realistic about what we can commit to." "Of course, Your Majesty." As the afternoon wore on, Thompson reflected on how much had changed since that tense confrontation in the castle corridor. He had learned that challenging authority could be both necessary and dangerous, but that when done with genuine care and respect, it could lead to better outcomes for everyone involved. Queen Camilla had learned that surrounding herself with people who would speak honestly, even when it was uncomfortable, was more valuable than having advisors who simply agreed with her decisions. And Whisper had learned that love could take different forms, that while nothing could replace Queen Elizabeth, new relationships could still bring comfort and joy. As they prepared to leave Mrs. Collins's garden, Thompson knelt down to give Whisper a gentle pat. The little corgi looked up at him with bright, alert eyes that no longer held the desperate sadness he had seen that day in October. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," Queen Camilla said quietly as they walked back toward the castle, "for reminding me that sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things." Thompson smiled, watching as the setting sun cast a warm glow over the gardens, where Queen Elizabeth had once walked with her beloved companions. "It was my honor, Your Majesty." "In every sense of the word?"